There's a lot to be said about psychology. When people think about psychology, it's usually along the lines of mental disorders, paranoid schizophrenia, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, etc. But have you ever wondered how psychology applies to daily life? I found that a lot of what I do can be categorized into 3 forms of learning: observational, classical conditioning, and operant conditioning. Let's start with the easiest to understand. Number 1, observational learning. As the name suggests, it's defined as learning by observing others. A man named Albert Bender developed the social learning theory using the concept of modeling or observational learning. Although it's not quite the modeling that you and I are used to as in the profession, there is the use of role models, which is something that we all have experienced. Many of my habits can be attributed to this form of learning, whether that be double checking if the door is locked, which is what I learned by watching my father, tapping a soda can before opening, which I learned by watching my sister, or opening doors for others, learned by watching my mother. The point being that I wasn't told to do any of these things. Rather, I learned it by watching others. Number 2, classical conditioning, a type of learning in which an organism comes to associate stimuli. Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov developed the theory of classical conditioning by using dogs, thus the need to classify this not by humans alone, but by organisms. Let's simplify this concept using formulas. Don't worry, this isn't rocket science. A unconditioned stimulus yields an unconditioned response is the first step. The second step is where a neutral stimulus associated with an unconditioned stimulus yields an unconditioned response. And then finally, a conditioned stimulus yields a conditioned response. In my life, classical conditioning can explain my arachnophobia as well as my entomophobia, which is a fear of insects. That is, the unconditioned stimulus was the unknown skin irritant that would cause the unconditioned response, which was hives. The neutral stimulus was the sight of a spider or an ant, plus the unconditioned stimulus being the skin irritant, which would yield the unconditioned response of hives. As a result, the conditioned stimulus became the sight of insects, and the result would be hives or fear, or even both. My fear of all insects is a product of generalization, where I believe all insects will cause me to break out into hives rather than a discrimination where I am able to recognize one insect or arachnid as the source of my fear. As of yet, I have not experienced extinction, as the connection between the sight of insects has remained consistent, as I still have a illusory correlation between the two happenings as it has been continuously reinforced. Number 3, operant conditioning. A type of learning in which behavior is strengthened if followed by a reinforcer or diminished if followed by a punisher. Common sense, huh? Kind of like the law of effect. The complexity is derived from the schedules of reinforcement. That is, the schedule of reinforcements are continuous, fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. Believe it or not, many of these have or are being used on you every day. Fixed ratio is when a response is reinforced only after a specific number of responses. Think back to elementary school. At least for me, substitute teachers would award students stickers for every question they volunteered to answer, and every 5 stickers would result in you getting a prize. Continuous reinforcement was used in order to establish an association between the behavior and the response, as continuous reinforcement allows for quick learning. And then fixed ratio was used as a means of having the learned behavior to be more resistant to extinction. Cool, huh? Variable ratio, which is number 2, is more like a lottery, where a response is reinforced after an unpredictable number of responses. As a child, my sister employed this method, as she would praise me after getting her water every once in a while. As I desired this response from my sister, I often got her water in hopes that she would praise me. Number 3, fixed interval is a lot like fixed ratio. However, rather than the number of responses, it is after a specified time that a behavior is reinforced. My teachers have used this as in the past in order to keep the class quiet, and that if the class remained quiet throughout the whole period, we would be released 5 minutes early, thus using negative reinforcement as they took away time in class in order to reinforce our behavior to be quiet. Finally, the 4th, variable interval schedule is what I have experienced from my teachers in the form of pop quizzes. In order to positively punish a lack of studying, teachers introduce quizzes that happen on random dates and are not announced prior to class, thus the pop quiz. So, psychology is not just the study of abnormalities, like criminal minds, but rather the entirety of human behavior and motivations. Want to learn more about psychology? Consider taking a class that is offered at your school.